Okay, now here we are, and I can see Michael Mellon, so I can see a chat here. So welcome, Michael. See if I can post the chat on the screen for some reason. Francisco Ruiz, Francisco Javier, I can see your chat, but it won't let me post on the screen, which is kind of weird. Let me see one thing here. Let me see if I type anything up. Okay, I know what it is. I have to go to this box here. Let me see now. Oh, here it is, Michael Mellon. I have like the camera that looks at me doesn't have to program the chat thing. Michael Mellon, we got Francisco Javier Ruiz Gomez, Groucho Marx. Okay, so it's good to have you guys. This is an impromptu setup video. It's going to be shorter than I thought because I have visit coming up, an unexpected visit in about 45 minutes. So this is the Russian Campaign 5th edition. This is 5th Deluxe Edition. This is by GMT in coordination with Consim Press, and that's John Kranz's company. And I want to thank John Kranz for sending me the game and the mounted map board. This is one of my favorite games of all times because of the significance of the game when it came out. We have also St. Louis, Keith. Oh, that map. Okay, the test came out. Okay, so the importance of this game is it came out in 1974. Jedco was a company that published it in Australia. John Edwards, the designer. And it's a game that does a lot with very little. If you have the original Avalon Hill version, it's about 10 pages of rules. Okay, it's 3 columns, not a lot of examples. The GMT version adds a ton of illustrated examples, which makes everything easier to understand. It's not a very complex game. I would say it's a medium to low medium complexity game. And that's why it does a lot with very little, because you don't have to read a ton of rules, and it doesn't bring too many counters. It's a core level game on the Axis side, and most of the Russian units are armies. There are some corps also. So you can, in a very long sitting, you can probably play the whole war in the East. And the great thing about it is that it delivers a pretty realistic experience in terms of the types of battles that developed in the Eastern Front, encirclements, and it forces you to defend in depth. You can't put everything in the front line. You have to defend behind the front line because there's going to be Axis units at the beginning of the game, and then the Soviets attacking at the end of the game, that they will be able to penetrate the line and then form these pockets that happen historically. You have Stalingrad, you have the Korsun pocket, you have the Kursk offensive was designed to trap a lot of Russian armies, but it failed. So you have that type of style of warfare represented in a game with not a lot of complexity. And what this deluxe edition brings is that first it upgrades the quality of the components. Really nice components, from 1/2-inch counters to 5/8 of an inch. Thickness is very, very nice. The maps, instead of one map, it's 2 full-size maps. So it enlarges the game, and it incorporates all of the optional rules that were developed throughout the years. And you can make this game as complex as you want with a lot of what-ifs and all that. So because we have limited time today, I want to show you the physical components, and we'll be setting up the game. And just to give you an idea of the components, here you see a setup card. The game brings a setup card for the Russians. This is the Russian setup card. And if you notice, I have the units that are there, the counters that are there, are only the reinforcements. The ones that start on the board, I've already placed them near their positions because we will be setting them up. There's one for the Russians, and there's one for the Axis player also. So let's take a look at the map board so you can get an idea of what's included in the map board. Here you have the turns, and you see the turns there. The turns are in boxes that are color-coded, and those that are in yellow are clear weather turns. The original game didn't bring this color coding. The game starts with the number 1 turn here. But there's an optional rule that if you play with that optional rule, it assumes that the Germans didn't have to invade Yugoslavia and the invasion could start before. So you would have 1 full turn before. But notice that that is in green. And that green coloring means that it is a variable weather turn. And you have to roll for weather. And the weather that you can get in this game, in addition to clear, is light mud, mud, and snow. Now in March and April, it's going to be either light mud or mud. So here we see the turn record track, and notice that it has the symbols of each of the sides, the German cross and the Soviet star, and those turns that side receives reinforcements. So you have all that information, very handy here, and you have a white box there. That January-February 1942 turn is a snow turn. And during snow turns, in the first 2 winters, the Germans are, as you know, historically they were unprepared for the winter, for winter warfare. So their supply, the distance they can trace supply to supply sources is going to be reduced in the first and second winters. So here you have the turn record track, which continues all the way to turn number, let me see if we get all the way there. Turn number 25. That's May, June 1945. Let's take a look at the other boxes that you have here on the map. We have also, for example, sea movement is represented abstractly. Baltic Sea, Gulf of Finland movement. You have to roll on a 2 or less. It is successful, and then you have the modifiers there, depending if you control the cities that are there. So also, it's 1 unit per side per turn. So I like these summaries that save you a trip to the rule book. You have them there on the board. And let's see what else is there here. In this game, air power is abstracted. The Germans receive at the beginning of the game 3 air support markers, the Stuka markers, and that +3 is the number of odds that are increased. So if you attack at 3-1 and you add a Stuka, it goes up to 6-1. And the rules are that you can only add up to 1 air support marker per battle. Now the Soviets, in this game, they have air support markers. In the original game, there were no air support markers for the Soviets. So this is something that has been incorporated into the standard game as part of the 5th edition. And let's flip over the Sturmovix. So here you see the Sturmovix. So notice that the Sturmovix, each one only increases the odds by 1. However, you can place as many Sturmovix as you want, and I think that you have to trace a range to the Stavka headquarters. The Stukas have to be within 8 hexes of a German headquarters, and the game brings 3 German headquarters. Now, we have here the air power availability chart to the side here, and you see that it is dependent on the year and the weather. So, for example, at the beginning of the game, you're going to have, that's the clear weather turn in 1941. The Germans, in black, have their 3 Stukas available. And notice that then as the weather deteriorates, for example, in light mud, they would only use that turn 1. And in mud turns, 1, and in snow turns, nothing in that 1941 turn. But notice what happens again in 1942 in the clear weather turn. Now it's only 2 Stukas. And this represents abstractly the Germans gradually losing air superiority as the war progresses, and the Russians get more help from the Allies, Lend-Lease, and also they are increasing their own domestic production of weaponry, including aircraft. And notice, in 1943, it's just 1 Stuka marker in clear weather and nothing else. And then you have the 1 in red with the asterisk. That's where the Sturmovix start to arrive. You have, if you're the Soviets, you have 1 Sturmovik, but the asterisk means it comes in July, August. So mid-year, you have that first Sturmovik. So that's the air availability chart, which is conveniently also printed on the map. We have also printed on the map on the other side more charts, and they're near the respective areas that they pertain to. You have here the Black Sea Sea of Azov movement. In this area, you can conduct invasions, each side up to 2 per game. And then there's something that is new with this version, is that you keep track of the number of invasions. So let's say that the Germans conducted an invasion attempt, then you put a marker there. So with a 1, and later they conduct another one, you place a marker here. Oops, got my hand there with a 2. So that's something new with this edition. There's a lot. You have a lot of markers to facilitate play, and also in this side of the board we have the combat results table, and it is odds based. And notice that some of the columns have 2 odds. So a 5-to-1 attack is the same as a 6-to-1 attack. So let's say, for example, that there's a 3-to-1 attack and the Germans use a Stuka. That would increase to 6-to-1. So we would resolve the attack on this column. We roll 1d6, and for example here, the result would be a DR. And the results here range from, let's check the possible results that you can see in the game. You have attacker elimination, which is straightforward. All attacking units are eliminated. You have attacker, here is attacker loss. 1 attacker unit of the attacker choice is eliminated, and then the attacker retreats any surviving attacking units 1 or 2 hexes. You have attacker retreat. The attacker retreats all attacking units 1 or 2 hexes. Then you have this result, which can be pretty nefarious at times. Contact means that nothing happens. The units stay in contact, that is adjacent to each other. In this game, the units have to attack enemy units mandatorily that are in their zone of control. And we have Michael Rinella also here with us. Nice to see you, Mike. And we have ID Jester. Oh yeah, it's happy to be. I'm happy to be useful here. And War D Robe. Oh, you're welcome. So here you see the contact result is a way in which you have this situation where units remain in contact, and then the next player, let's suppose the Germans attacked, remain in contact with the Soviets in their first impulse. When the Germans go to the second impulse, they have to mandatorily attack those Soviets. So you can bring more units or conduct the attack with what you have. And we'll see, hopefully I'll be doing a video soon on the game. We're gonna set it up today, but let's continue with the possible results. Then you have this other result, which is exchange. And the exchange result, each side loses a unit, and then the defender has to retreat 1 or 2 hexes. But remember, here the attacker always retreats the attacking and defending units. And then here, but the defender retreats only in exchanges. And then you have the results that affect the defending units. Here, defender retreats 2 hexes, 1 or 2 hexes, but retreated by the attacker. And then you have defender loss, in which case the defender loses 1 unit, and all remaining defending units are retreated 2 hexes by the attacker. Then you have the defender eliminated result. And units that are eliminated go to the replacement boxes. So, for example, Axis units that are eliminated go to the Axis replacement pool, and Soviet units that are eliminated go to the Russian replacement pool. And it's important, the distinction between eliminated and surrendered, because eliminated units can return via the replacement mechanic. You can bring units as replacements from those eliminated. And then we have the other possible result, which, if you're the Axis player, this is the one you're seeking to obtain the most, which is defender surrendered. In that case, the units go to the surrendered box, and those never return to the game. You have a surrendered box here for the Russian units, and you have a smaller surrendered box for Axis units. I mean, it's going to be tough for the Russians to get a lot of Axis surrendered units, but the Axis player, which has the onus of the attack at the beginning of the game, has to maximize that number of Russian surrendered units, because in this game, the Russians get replacements each turn. The Axis gets replacements only at the beginning of the year. So that's the one of the considerations with this game. And yes, you're right, the contact results sometimes is almost as bad as other results in the game. So let's continue here. That's the combat results table. You also have a summary here of the terrain effects chart. And the terrain is clear. You have woods, and all units have to stop on wood hexes, but it only costs 1 movement point for infantry, mountain, and paratroops, and Luftwaffe infantry. Now, woods has the particularity that units do not have to retreat. So if you're an attacker, you got an AR result, you don't have to retreat. You can say, no, those units won't be retreated. So you can ignore retreats there. You have mountain hexes. Those double the combat factor of defending units, and all units there have to stop except mountain units. And you have also swamp. And swamp, everybody has to stop there. And it only costs 1 movement point to enter during snow turns. And then you have rivers. Rivers don't stop movement, but they affect combat. All the defenders are doubled if all attacking units are on a river hex of the same river. Then you have major cities, which double the defense strength. Minor cities don't. And you have oil fields, which are important for replacement purposes for the Axis. The Axis wants to capture oil fields because the more oil fields you capture, you increase your replacement of Panzer Corps each turn. You can receive 1 Panzer Corps from the eliminated pool for each oil field that the Axis controls, and they only control the oil fields at Ploesti, Romania at the beginning of the game. There's 2 in the Caucasus that they can increase their capacity. And then you have prohibited hex sides, sea and lakes, and the Kerch Strait, which has some special rules there to cross. Now, this game was innovative in when it came out originally. It was innovative in the sense that up to that time, there were games that simulated mechanized warfare by having an initial movement phase, followed by a combat phase, and then followed by a mechanized movement phase where you had another movement phase where you can only move your tanks or motorized infantry. This game changed that. It's a double impulse game. It's like you go twice each turn. In your first impulse, you have a movement phase, and then you have a combat phase, and combat is mandatory. If your unit is in an enemy zone of control, that unit has to attack all the units that are in its zone of control. So you have these rigid zones of control that you have to stop, and also attack units that are in the zone of control. Then after that impulse, notice there's no advance after combat in this game. After that first impulse, then that side goes to its second impulse, and it moves again. But this time movement is limited. I'm going to show you how that is, how it works, that second impulse movement, because it is dependent on weather and the type of unit involved. So let's take a look here at the movement allowance chart. And you have, for example, during, let me see if I can get the a pointer here. I had it somewhere. Well, look. Here it is. Okay, so in the first impulse, all units can move their full movement allowance if it's a clear weather turn. Now, if it's light mod, they can move up to 4 movement points. And that makes a difference because, for example, the Germans, their tanks have a movement allowance of 4, and their infantry has also a movement allowance. I mean, tanks have a movement allowance of 7, and infantry a movement allowance of 4. So in full movement, in a clear turn, it's 7 for the tanks and 4 for the infantry. But light mod, the tanks can move up to 4 hexes, the same as infantry. Now in mud turns, they can move up to 2 movement factors, and in snow, it's half the movement rate rounded up. So for the panzer there, it would be 4, and for the infantry, it would be 2. Now, if we go to the second impulse here, now things start to change depending on unit type. And here you see, for example, German panzer units and Panzer Grenadier during the second impulse, that second mini turn, they can move up to 4 movement factors, while German infantry, mountain infantry, cavalry, artillery, and paratroops can move 2. And Axis, these are minor Axis units like Romanians, Hungarians, these type of units, tank and motorized infantry can also move 2, as well as Russian Guard units of any kind and Russian armored units. And you're going to see that the color coding in the units also is very helpful. These units that can move during the second impulse on the German side, they are in a lighter green, and those that cannot move in the second impulse are in a dark green color scheme. Now, there's units that can't move at all during the second impulse. These are Axis minors, which are infantry, mountain, and cavalry. And you have all Russian regular infantry, artillery, cavalry, and parachutes, 0. So those can't move during the second impulse. You also have headquarters. Headquarters can only move during the second impulse. And you have the leaders in this game, that if you lose your leader, you lose the game. And these can only use rail movement, but cannot move otherwise. So that's the double impulse system, which makes it a unique game. I mean, by its time, when it came out, there was nothing like it. And it's not a complex game at all. It's a game that is very approachable, even by today's standards. And the good thing, it's been updated to today's components. So let's take a look at the situation that is on the board, and we'll start setting the game up. So you have, for example, that the front is divided on the Russian side in military districts. And here you have, for example, the Baltic military district. And I've placed all the units that are supposed to be set up in that district in a stack, because we will be setting them up. And then we have, to the south, the Western military district, which is a larger district that you see there. And notice that the district is not only the hexes in the front line, it covers 1 or 2 hexes deep. And when you set up in this game, you have to be mindful that this is a double impulse game. That first impulse, you're going to lose units on the front line, so you have to have something behind them to stop the enemy advance. And then we have the Kiev military district there. And this game brings an optional rule that eliminates these 3 mountain hexes, which, as we stated before, stop movement. And it is by placing this overlay there, which I'm not going to place now, they turn into clear hexes. So you have the Kiev military district, and then you have down here the Odessa military district. Now, why are military districts important? Because they dictate the attacks by each of the German army groups during the first impulse. Here we have the units of Army Group North. They can only attack during the first impulse units of the Baltic military district. You may place these units practically anywhere, but they can only attack in the first impulse units in the Baltic military district. And then the same happens here with Army Group Center units. You have them there. They can only attack units of the Western military district. And then continuing to the south, you have Army Group South, can only attack units in the first impulse in the Kiev military district. And finally, you have the units that begin in Romania, which you see here, some German and some Romanian units in the first impulse, they can only attack the Odessa military district. So let's start setting the game up. Let's, the Russians set up first, so let's imagine the Germans are not there. So you also have to be mindful that in the first turn of the game, the river defense bonus does not exist. And that is a rule that was made to create the surprise element in the Barbarossa invasion. So let's say that we have this typical setup here of the Russian units. You have them here in the next to the frontier. The Germans will set up after the Russians, after we finish setting up all the Russians, the Axis units set up, but they set up in any space that is not adjacent to the Russians. So here we have, for example, how the Russians in the Odessa military district are going to set up. Next we have the Kiev military district. So let's set these guys up. And this one I'll show you live. There's a lot of different setups during the 70s and 80s in the general. There were different kinds of setups. Some are of the philosophy that you want to prevent automatic victory attacks in that first impulse. Those are attacks at 10 to 1 odds, or attacks with Stukas at 7 to 1 odds. The Stuka increases it to 10. So you would have something like this, where you would have strong units in the front lines in order to prevent any automatic victory attacks. And then you would have some units in the back in order to prevent the exploitation, something like this. Okay. So here you would have these units will take the initial attack, and then in the second impulse you're going to be facing a tough unit here in Lwów. You have all these armored units. Now notice again, these units, if they survive in the first impulse, if they survive the first German turn, they can move only in the first impulse of the Russian turn. So Russian infantry units are not very mobile unless you're using the rails, and we'll talk about the rails pretty soon. So let's take a look now at the setup in the Western military district. So let's push the Germans back here. Okay, so we'll do the same thing. We'll place, here you have Brest. Brest is a minor city. It does not increase the combat strength of anybody. This woods prevents retreat, so we'll place a unit there. And we want to cover one of the other spaces there. This is a very weak 3-3. And now we have to place some units behind. But we also always have to be mindful to place them within the confines of the military district. So that will be the placement of those units there. And now we go to the Baltic military district. So let's get the Germans out of the way there. And here we have 2 infantry armies and 2 armored corps. So we're going to place the infantry armies in the front lines. And we'll place the armored units behind as a second line of defense. So we still have to place the units of the Leningrad front. Those are the units that are facing the Finns. And at the beginning of the game, the Soviets have in Leningrad, they have an armored or a tank corps and a worker unit. These are the units, the worker units, that are used to determine the number of replacement combat factors that the Russians can bring each turn. And at the beginning of the game, there are a number of these worker units in different cities totaling 11 worker factors. So that means that if they're all intact when the Russian turn comes up, the first Russian turn, then you can pick from the eliminated pool units totaling 11 combat factors. And you can place them on these hexes that have worker units or bring them from the east edge of the board. So in the Leningrad military district, there's only 2 armies. And of course, we need to protect Leningrad. So this will be the setup for the Russians there. In addition to the units that we've just set up, the Russians have, for example, they have here in Riga, they have an infantry army, the 27th Army, as well as the tank corps. In Minsk, they also have 2 units, as you can see here, a tank corps and another 4-3, the 13th Army. In Kiev, they have 3 units in Kiev. They have a worker unit with a value of 2, the 18th Army, and a cavalry corps. And then they have 2 worker units further east in Stalino and Kharkov. And then finally, you see here in Kalinin and Tula, near Moscow, there's 1 army. And then let's take a look at what's in that Moscow hex. There's 5 counters there. Let's spread them out. And you see that there's a worker unit, value 3. You have the Stalin piece, Stavka. And Stavka is important, I think, also for the airdrops. You have to trace a range of hexes, which I can't remember now, in order to do airdrops. Then you have the 19th Army, and you have a tank corps. So that's in Moscow. Now notice these units are far away, but in this game, rails are important. And rails in this game allow both sides to move their units long distances. And rails, the rail capacity for each side is, for the Germans during clear weather, it's up to 6 units. And I think that gets reduced to 3 during snow turns. Now for the Russians, it's up to 5 counters, 5 units per turn, regardless of weather. But the rail lines in this game are not fully usable until they are converted to one's side. And that is reflected in the game by the use of these railhead markers. The German railroad gauge wasn't as wide as the Soviet gauge. I think the Soviet gauge was wider. And so the Germans are going to be advancing east, and the rail hexes that they control, these markers will be placed in the hex that is in German control, which is not in a Russian zone of control, further to the east, and that is the furthest extension that Germans or Axis units can move their units by rail there. Movement by rail is unlimited, but it's limited to a number of units, as I stated before, 6 for the Germans, clear weather, 5 for the Soviets. So you'll see also in the game the placement of these railhead markers. So let's place now the Axis units on the board. And we got some comments here. Let's take a look at the comments. There are major changes. There's not major changes. The game remains mostly the same. I think the Sturmovix is something that they incorporated in the regular game. There's not any major, the counters, I see them all are the same, and I think the map board didn't change either. So there's not major changes. There's a lot of optional rules that I intend to cover later in a separate video. You can do just a whole video on the optional rules. There's that, and of course, being optional, you choose how many of those you want to incorporate. And yes, that's correct. Now, double impulse is what's really innovative here, because you have to think in terms of depth. You have to stop the advance, but also you have to prevent those encirclements. And we have Dead Wolf with us, and Deploribus Rex. This is another way of showing a blast from the past. And it's good when you see a game like this, you know, that is still being published. Okay, the Compass game version has one advantage though. It's a one mapper, so it fits in most tables. This one is big, so you know, sometimes you want to play a game which fits on a table nicely. For this one, you need a little bit more space, so it's always good. I have the Compass game also. Actually, I have a Jetco version. I have the Avalon Hill versions, because I still have one in shrink wrap because I have the old game I played, and I have the Compass, and I have this one. This is one of my favorite games. So yes, the graphics are crisp. The map is kind of greenish. It has a greenish tone, but everything is clear, and you can see that the counters fit nicely in the hexes. They have additional touches, like for example, the cities. You know, if it's a major city, if it has a yellow border on the hex. If it is a regular minor city, it has, for example, a white color border, like you see here, Lwów. So that you have some nice touches, and you know, just the size of it makes it a lot more comfortable. So now let's set up the Germans, and these are the Romanians and the Germans. So we'll just place these around here. Notice the only Romanians that can move in the second impulse are these mechanized units. So we want to place them in a place where they can do some harm in case there's an advance. We cannot place them adjacent to Russian units. This is a mountain corps, the only units that can move more than one hex in mountains. So we'll place this one over here. And we'll just set them up like this, and because these will be moving and attacking. So that's the setup for the units in Romania. Now we have the setup for the units in the Army Group South. And we have Glenn Sweet with us. Nice to have you, Glenn. And we have Francisco Javier. And you, well, there's enough additions to pick. There's additions sufficient for everyone's tastes. So here, these units can only attack in the first impulse the Kiev military district. So, see, these 5 units, if you do an automatic victory, if you get 10-to-1 odds during the movement phase, they're eliminated in the movement phase. It's like an overrun. And then you can bring other units to bypass and ignore that particular hex. But having these strong units in the front lines, it's really hard for the Germans to achieve automatic victory. So we will just try to achieve 3-to-1 odds with the Stukas, or 5-to-1 odds without the Stukas. So 3-to-1 odds would be 15. So one thing the Germans have to have in mind in this game always is that you can't afford to lose units because they get replaced once per year. So you always want to include one of these weak 3-4 infantry units. In case you get an exchange, you eliminate one of these. So you don't want to attack with all your panzer units, get an exchange, and then lose a panzer unit in the process. So we'll create this stack here with 15 combat factors, and we'll place it here. They'll be aiming at this one, and we'll create another stack with 15 combat factors, and we'll place it in front of this army here. So these two will take care of this one. This one is doubled in defense, 10. So do we really want to attack that one? Perhaps no. So here in this frontage, the only units that we can actually attack are this 5-3, which is very heavily aided by the mountains. So we can probably, instead of attacking at 3-to-1, we can increase the odds here. So let's include here these are 12, and these will be moving. This is going to get surrounded probably anyway in the first turn. So, and the mountain unit here is to keep that Russian unit honest. We want to protect our headquarters also. So that's the setup for the Army Group South. Now we have Army Group Center, which sets up opposite to the Western Military District. Army Group Center is the largest of all the Army groups, and it is the Army group that has the most Panzer Corps. So you want to be able to penetrate deep behind those lines there. And notice there's a lot of clear terrain here. These wood hexes will stop the panzers, and the Pripyat marches during non-snow turns will also stop the panzers. Okay. Okay. Okay, so as I announced before, the visit that I had has arrived. So I will be probably showing this game either tomorrow on a live session, or if not, it's going to be an edited video, and we will show combat results. And so stay tuned to the channel, and I apologize. I didn't know I had to cut it short, but you know, life is like that. So I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, even though this is, again, how do you say, an unannounced video, like a lot of the ones that I do. But if I don't do tomorrow a live video, then it will be an edited video, or I may even do both. I may do a live video tomorrow. So tomorrow we can actually, what we can do is play a full turn live, and we'll give away 2 games. How about that? Okay? So it's going to be live tomorrow, and it's going to be like about this same hour here. It's about, I think we'll probably start around 7 p.m. Puerto Rico time, whatever time it is in your neck of the woods. So I want to thank you for supporting the channel, and I will be seeing you then tomorrow. So this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching, guys.